Barbara. Okay, welcome again to everyone. And as I said before, I hope this is useful for you in your classroom, how to use workforce materials with a multi-level classroom. Let's get started here. Okay, we saw the poll regarding how long have you been teaching, and it seems like, let me go back here and let's take a look at it. Has everybody put in their information? It looks like we're pretty even. 2 to 5 years, 6 to 9, or 10 or more. Okay, here's somebody less than a year. All right, and that gives us an idea of how much information we may or may not have regarding the ESL classroom or a multi-level classroom. And it seems to me that prior to 5 to 8 years ago, we didn't have many ESL classrooms that were labeled multi-level. As for ESL teachers, we've always known that in any ESL classroom, we would naturally have students with varying skill abilities. For example, some will have a higher speaking skill and lower writing skills, or the reverse. But ESL classes weren't necessarily titled multi-level. So now I know that all of you are in a multi-level classroom, and so let's move on. I have another question here for you. To help me know where you're coming from as well, and to help us all be on a similar page, here's my question. In one sentence, what is the one greatest teaching concern you have in a multi-level classroom? And if you'll look to the right at the top, it says greatest teaching concern. If you would go ahead and type in one sentence that explains what your greatest teaching concern is regarding a multi-level ESL classroom. And I'll give you a couple minutes to think about it and type that in, and let's see what everyone has to say. Welcome, Daniel Murray. How are you? It's nice to see you here today, quote unquote. Will the technology I use be able to be used by all levels? Boy, that's a good question. How to keep every student engaged? Yes, I agree. Keeping everyone engaged and making certain all are learning. Absolutely. Meeting everyone's needs. Yep. I'm afraid I'll shortchange one of the levels, probably the lowest or the highest, says Nancy. Yep. How to attend to all levels, making sure all students are involved in the learning process. Meeting students' needs, especially lower level pre-lit groups. Okay. It sounds like we're on the same page. I'll give Jennifer a chance to finish typing. She has a lot to say. Okay, greatest concern is meeting each student's ESL learning needs. I'm particularly concerned about not overwhelming the lower level students, nor probably not challenging upper level students. Okay, very, very good. Let's go on, and we'll see how we can collaborate to meet these concerns that you have. Here are the webinar objectives. Okay, and I know you can read, but I'll just go through them quickly. By the end of this webinar, Each of you will be able to locate instructional materials that support ESL students' development of workforce skills that transfer from the classroom to the workplace on the CalPro website. Describe how I, the presenter, have adapted 2 sets of these instructional materials for my multi-level class and summarize my results. And finally, identify 1 or 2 ways that a 3rd workforce lesson can be adapted for use in your own multi-level classroom. So I'm going to go through some suggestions that I have used, and then I'll be asking all of you to type in ideas for a 3rd lesson and how you might adapt it for your multi-level classroom. Okay, another response from you, teaching workforce content in a multi-level classroom. To ensure that we're all on the same page, let's quickly review 2 things. First, think about workforce soft skills and what they are. For example, working as a team member. What are the skills your students need in order to participate in the workforce here in the U.S.? Would you please type in your response to this question in the chat pod on the right? And again, you'll see it's near the bottom. This one is regarding workforce soft skills, such as working as a team member. Ability to learn, reliability, conscientiousness, honesty, ability to work well with others, oral and written communication, adaptability. Wow, Nancy, okay. Work well with others, communicate, check for understanding. That's interesting. Being able to effectively communicate ideas. And I think that's hard even among English speakers, isn't it? Communication with coworkers, able to ask questions to clarify. Volunteering, participating, having confidence. That's so true. Communicative skills. Yep. How to object and bring up points diplomatically. Boy, that is so cultural, isn't it? Reliability, communication, organization. Okay, being creative. Flavia says willingness to learn without preconceptions. Listen accurately, follow instructions. Okay, excellent. Excellent. All right, and here we have a succinct list of transferable soft skills for the workplace. And you'll see most of them you listed there in the chat pod. If we as teachers take a look at the workplace today, we can easily see how critical these skills are in order to succeed in the U.S. workplace. And in the multi-level ESL classroom, our challenge is to meet the needs of a variety of students at different levels, as you mentioned in your chat pod about concerns. And we have to do all of that at once. This requires teaching strategies that make the content of any lesson in English to be as comprehensible as possible. So with that in mind, let's move on. Okay, so how can a teacher in a multi-level ESL classroom make lesson content comprehensible for the greatest number of students? Well, in thinking about it, 2 of the most important ways that I have found to help student success in the multi-classroom, I've listed here. How can I maximize the learning for my students in a multi-level classroom? How can I increase the comprehensibility of English used in my lessons? And in evaluating my own classroom, I chose these two areas to focus on today, scaffolding and groupings. And in groupings, I mean small groups and as well as peer tutoring. So let me share some details with you. All right, here is another poll I'm going to ask you to participate in. Please look at this and select the answer that tells what scaffolding is. And I'll bring up that poll for you. Let me move it down so you can see. Okay. You'll see on this slide as well some references if you want more information about scaffolding. Wow, I guess we're unanimous on that one. Great. So, just as scaffolding is used to support construction of a building, we can use the same technique to support our multi-level student learning. Let's look at ideas on how to actually do this. I will use this strategy later to adapt the 2 workforce lessons that I used in my multi-level classroom. Wow, 100%. Okay, let me move this up here out of the way a little bit so we can still chat down below. All right, and you're right, D, all of the above. All right. Some of the scaffolding techniques most frequently used for adult education, as you apparently already know, include jigsaw reading, cooperative grouping and learning, and graphic organizers like Vengrams. We slow down the learning pace for new topics and try to build on students' prior knowledge. Which of these do you use in your classroom? I'm going to have you go right down to the general chat pod down below and type in which of these are common in your classroom. This is just a partial list also. I know there are a lot of other things as well. Which do you use typically? Oh, I'm sorry, Jennifer. Well, I see cooperative group techniques, just writing a joint writing of a project, purposely using synonyms and antonyms, using an instructional framework that includes explicit teaching, graphic organizers, manipulatives, word wall, making a variety of resources available in the classroom, dictionaries, thesauruses, etc., labeling visuals, instructional scaffolding, okay, jigsaw reading, jigsaw activities. Some of you may use think, pair, share. Cognates, so Lillian says Cognates, instructional framework, joint writing, cooperative group techniques, graphic organizers, effective use of wait time. That is a challenge, giving our students a chance to think and respond. Okay, paraphrasing, groupings, activating prior knowledge, says Sandra, thank you. Using dictionaries. And I love how our students have their cell phones on the internet and they can get pronunciation as well as meanings for words. Okay, oral text followed by written. teaching in chunks, manipulative, activating prior knowledge, personal information, also making it personal, right? Crossability, pairs, groups, pictures. Okay, you definitely have the idea. Peer dictation. All right, excellent. Writing prompts using maps, globes, playing games, pairing, groupings. Wonderful. All right. Okay, excellent. A lot of labeled visuals, communicative practice, crossability groupings. Thank you. All right, excellent. Let's move on to groupings that support multi-level classes. And I have here, consider homogeneous groupings with students of the same level, and or consider grouping lower level ability students with higher level ability students. This provides a peer tutoring learning environment shown to be advantageous for students of all levels. I think this is a very powerful tool for teachers, and once you get a good handle on the purpose for your small groups, it can increase student learning significantly, as well as help students to enjoy ESL. Later, I'll be showing you the CalPro virtual workroom of interest to ESL teachers, and there they have a virtual workroom for multi-level instruction and also for workforce skills. And these can be a wonderful free resource for you. Okay, and the benefits of using small groups. First, a couple more polls so that no one's sleeping on the other end there. Here's the first one. Please vote here. Have you used small groups before in the classroom? Wow. So far unanimous. Nobody's going to say no, huh? Okay, excellent. And then even equally important, how about this one? Frequency of small group use. Now think about your classroom and how often do you use small groups in your classroom? We are quite a homogeneous group. All right. So it looks like many of you agree that the benefits of small groupings cannot be underestimated. All right, very good. Anyone else want to vote? All right, I'll go on. Okay. So when students work together in small groups or pairs, they're generally able to make information comprehensible for one another. They also experience a greater amount of language input. Have you ever noticed that when we walk away, we the teachers step away, they start talking more? It kind of makes me laugh sometimes. Students speak more when they're comfortable in a small group and contribute more to the group in this case. They also will ask more questions and clarify information. So it's not that we're not doing our job, it's that we're purposing these groups so that students participate more. Okay, raised hand. All right. Okay. Okay, and on to the next. Okay, let me ask this. Would you please raise your hand if you have used peer tutors before in your classroom? Remember, for this, you go up to the top bar there where you see the little person raising their hand. Okay, you guys already got it. So if you have used peer tutoring before, wow. Okay. All right. Wow. Okay. So the benefits, truly are improvement of academic skills, development of social skills, and the enrichment of peer relationships and interaction. And I think teachers worry sometimes, is the tutor getting as much out of it as the tutee? And the answer as far as research goes is definitely yes. Most definitely. And it's another way to help us as the teacher to make use of our classroom resources while managing to meet the wide variety of student needs in the multi-level classroom. And many of you up in our greatest teaching concerns said that one of your greatest concerns is to meet the needs of a variety of students at a lot of different levels. So this is one way you can do it. And I think if you keep your eyes out in the classroom, you'll find students who naturally seem to reach out and help others. So Sandra's asking down here, formal tutoring or informal? We have a lot of the latter in the classroom. I'm talking mostly, and really I'm talking about informal tutoring. So that you see someone in your class that just seems to naturally reach out to other students and help them. Those are often the ones that are able to explain how to do things in the classroom, to explain a lesson, what's going on, and to help other classmates who are maybe falling behind. But I have heard teachers say, I don't think it's fair to the tutor, and I've used this extensively, and I promise you that as we know as teachers, to know something well, we have to know something well to be able to help others, and that communication that's required helps both students. Okay. Now I've put here some suggestions or some ways that I've used in my classroom. For example, I've put one student, of course, from a higher level with a student from a lower level. Sometimes, as you see on the top left here, sometimes there's students with different native languages, and that's to encourage them to use English. But they most likely have to be a little bit higher in order to do that. Down below, students with the same native language, say the content is not easy and it's a new content, that might be a good time to have students work together and tutor with the same native language. At the top right, this is cross-age tutoring. You can see a younger student with an older student, and perhaps the older student has better reading skills, for example, and can help the younger student, whereas oftentimes the younger student has more computer skills and is able to help the older person in that way. And they really do enjoy working together. Sometimes on the bottom right, you'll see you want to put different cultures together, sometimes similar cultures. So these are just some ideas that I use and I have. If you have other additional ideas, please enter them below in the general chat. And Flavia's asking, how big can a small group be to work that way? I personally prefer 3 students. I notice if there's 4, that there's someone that can kind of slide and just listen. If there's 3, I notice they all tend to lean in and work and speak more. Sometimes with 2, sometimes they don't have enough ideas. And so for me, 3 works best. You can try different numbers, and it kind of depends on how many students you have too, and the space in your classroom. Sometimes you have to do what you have to do. But I myself prefer 3. Anybody else want to enter the number that you see working the best in your classroom down below in the general chat? Pamela says 4 to 5. Daniel says 3 to 4, it depends. I just tend to notice that the larger the group gets, the easier it is for someone not to participate. Sometimes I actually have a participation monitor, and they make sure that everybody gets a chance to speak and that everybody's participating. Karen says 3. Okay, good. Any odd numbers so that if there's a tiebreaker, a decision can be made? Good. And Daniel's saying, organically, they seem to fall into groups of just 2 or 3. However, they go to 4 or 5, you let them. Okay. Good. So Lillian groups sometimes around common job or school-related topics, up to 4. It really does depend on your time, your space, the number of students. Okay, and Jennifer's saying often it depends on how many higher level students I have. And that's true too, because you'll probably want to put at least one of those in each group if possible. Okay, so Daniel's right too. Sometimes you have that student who doesn't like to talk at all. Sometimes they even think it's a bad habit because they're making mistakes. Oh boy, we've been talking a lot about that lately. So that's true. It's just horrible to be paired with someone that won't participate. So you kind of have to know your students. A couple more people are typing. Okay. All right, and Nancy has an interesting point too, that she's happy when she's able to let students work alone first and then in a pair or a group. And again, that depends on the project or the lesson that you're doing. How large are groups? That's a good question. I don't know if we'll have time to answer it here. Okay. I like to get them talking on their feet. All right, I make sure that they have a higher level student, a leader, quote unquote, and those leaders just pop right up to the top, don't they? Okay, some people need more time than others. True. Okay, I'm going to have to move on pretty quick here. Okay, all right, so very good. Okay, let's move on. So, I'm most excited about this aspect of groupings and peer tutoring in the classroom, and that's the social aspect, which is often a challenge for so many of our students who maybe came to the U.S. alone. So I have included these skills here because they are a benefit that overlap with academic learning as well as workforce and life skills. So remember, small group experiences and peer tutoring allow students to develop these social skills as well. There we are again, disagreeing politely, building consensus. Many of you mentioned those before. Okay, all right. Now we're going to move on here, and this is a picture of the CalPro website. And I'm just going to give you a quick overview because we're going to be moving on to the workforce lessons. In case you have not been on the CalPro virtual workroom page, it looks like this. And if you look at the red arrow, it shows you that there's a virtual workroom on workforce readiness. Above that, you'll also see multi-level ESL instructors workroom. And then below, the best practices in ABE reading instruction. These, the lessons inside here are downloadable and they're available today. So there are many lessons there for you to use. And again, this is what the CalPro Virtual Workroom looks like. When you go to the Workforce sign-in page, you'll have to make a login for yourself. Okay. And then when you enter the Workforce Workroom, this is part of what you'll see. With the red outline there, these are the types of lessons, some of the lessons you can get. Okay, and 3 of those we'll be using today. Also on the right, you'll see other topics there that you can click on and get information about. Before we finish this webinar today, Catherine will come on and she'll actually go to that website and take you around and give you a little more specific information so that if you want, you know how to get workforce lessons to use in your multi-level classroom. Okay, so now we're going to move on and we're going to go to the first lesson. Okay. Actually, let me go back just for a second. I want to make this slide a little bit larger for you. Okay, lesson 1, what kind of worker are you? This is an overview of the lesson. And this is where I'll be applying the scaffolding and grouping into a tangible lesson that you can use in your classroom. I've used the lessons that I will share with you today in my own classroom, supplementing my textbook, and students have really enjoyed them. You see the title, what kind of worker are you? The main workplace skills, which I have to the left there, interpret and communicate, demonstrate sociability. And a couple of the worksheets students use for this lesson. On the bottom right, you will see conversation questions, and on the left, useful phrases. Let's look at the lesson with notes I have added to assist you with this multi-level classroom lesson. Okay, and let me go up to the top here. Don't get dizzy as I spin past here. All right, there we go. So if you download a lesson from the Workforce Readiness Workroom, you'll find a lesson like this. What kind of worker are you? Beginning high to advanced. Now I've added these kind of purplish gray boxes with suggestions that I used in my classroom that made the lesson more comprehensible and workable for a multi-level ESL classroom. Okay. So this lesson gives students the opportunity to evaluate themselves and think about what kind of worker they are. It helps to increase their self-awareness about learning workforce vocabulary and while practicing their speaking skills. Know that what I'm showing you here are my own adaptations, and I hope they'll give you ideas so that you can use these in your multi-level ESL classroom. So please be thinking about these suggestions and how they would work for you and your students, or perhaps how you would have to adapt them differently. If nothing else, I hope to give you some time here today to think about ways to make the English in your classroom more comprehensible to your ESL students at various levels. I hope these ideas and strategies will help you to be able to enjoy your teaching assignment. Isn't that a concept? I really, really enjoyed teaching, and I hope this will help you to do the same, even though you're in a multi-level classroom. Our students' success sometimes depends on our own enthusiasm and our ability to teach them. So many of the pictures that you're going to see, these are my students at a couple different schools. Okay, let's go on. Okay, what kind of worker are you? And here we are on the right with suggestions for the multi-level ESL class. Okay, so there's the general description of the skills. In this lesson, students interpret and communicate information by asking and answering questions about what kind of worker they are. And I found that my students were not very aware about what kind of worker they are. So this was very helpful. They demonstrate sociability by greeting each other, closing the conversation, and taking leave politely. In other words, moving on to another student that they're going to speak with. At the end of the activity, they have a clearer understanding of what kind of worker they are. Okay. So here's the introduction, workplace skills used in this lesson. I wrote these on the board and discussed the meanings with the class and clarified questions that they had. I did not use understand systems because it seemed high for my class, but they definitely were able to understand the interpret, communicate, and demonstrate sociability. All right. All right, and then if we come down, these are some techniques for a conversation card mixer. Now, each student receives a question card and circulates around the room. This is an overview of what goes on during this lesson. Students find partners and they politely greet each other and ask and answer questions on the conversation cards. Student pairs exchange cards, end the conversation politely, and find new partners. So I added some specifics here that I had to do with my class. First, we had to review the questions on the question cards, and I'll show you those cards in just a moment. We had to go through those first and point out the meanings for would you rather and do you prefer. And in thinking back on it, I gave the would you rather questions to the higher level students and the do you prefer to the lower students, at least for the first round of interviewing. Before students speak with a partner, I handed out the useful phrases sheet and had students focus on and practice two sections, how to begin a conversation and how to end a conversation. So let me go down and show you this sheet of useful phrases. And I asked my students to hang on to this because I think we'll use it for a lot of different lessons. Here we're passing by the conversation questions. They come printed. Okay, and I'll just go slowly by. And then down here on page 5 are the useful phrases. And I bolded the starting a conversation and ending a conversation because we use these for this lesson. And we just had practice between myself and students in the class, and it really was helpful for them, and it gave them more confidence when going around to speak and ask questions to other students. So I printed this out, gave it to them, asked them to keep it, and they could carry it around with them in the classroom in case they forgot different ways to start a conversation and end it. Okay, we'll go back up here. All right, then we're in the middle of the page of the lesson on the right. Practice pronunciation of the phrases with the class. And I have a slide over here on the left. I asked students to circle new words on the questions, and they came up with these 3 words: attire, rather, and environment. They wanted to know how to say those and what they meant. Of course, attire was brand new, Some of them knew rather, and they know prefer. Environment, it's not that they didn't know it, but they weren't sure how to say it. So I have a little line there through the end. I say we generally say environment, even though the spelling is environment. And that gives them more confidence also in speaking with other classmates, which they're going to do shortly. Depending on your time, tell students the minimum number of students they need to speak with during this part of the lesson. I didn't want them to stand and talk with each other for 15 minutes. I told them you have about 3 to 5 minutes, and then you need to move on to another student. And I gave them time to speak with 5 or more students. Okay, and finally, list the steps for the above-mentioned conversation on the board before students begin. Of course, they immediately said to me, now what do we do? So on the board, if you look on the left there, steps for the conversation. I just put an example, may I speak with you for a minute? And somebody said, can I speak to you for a minute? And so I put that up there. Of course you can. Number 1, and this is big on the board so everybody can see it. Start your conversation. They're going to have a little question card in their hand. Ask your question. Answer the question your partner asks you. End the conversation with one of the things listed on that useful phrases page, and then exchange question cards, or as somebody said, trade. And so now they know exactly what they're going to do in this lesson. Okay, and let's go back down and continue. There's the materials, handouts. I put a little suggestion here. Enlarge copies of questions if possible, because the cards themselves ended up being really small. And in this lesson, they ask you to print a copy of the cards and cut them out. Okay, and they are pretty small. And especially if you have some older students in your class. All right, and so as we come down, tell the students they're going to do this mixer conversation activity in which they learn about what kind of worker they are. Here's just an overview. Introduce to the students, today you're going to talk to your classmates and find out what kind of workers they are. Explain that they will also practice starting and ending a conversation politely. Practice, we modeled in front of the class, and then check their comprehension about what you just told them. Is the question on the card? Yes. Is the answer on the card? No. You have to give your own answer. Do you keep the same card during this activity? No. As it says over on the steps for the conversation, they're going to trade cards. Okay? Do you talk to the same student all the time? No. All right. And then you read. Here it's mentioning about reviewing the sheets again, asking students to stand up, find a partner, greet their partner. I had a bell that I rang when it seemed that everybody had pretty much answered their questions. I rang the bell, and then they knew they had to move to another partner. And then here are some, as it says here, after the activity, call on students and ask them to read the question card they ended up with. Have them select a classmate to answer the question. And then, of course, you want to kind of bring this to a review, what went on in your conversations. And here are some expansion activities. So in my school, our student learning outcome, or SLO, this semester is to work on writing skills. So I decided to add this basic expansion for the class. The higher level students were able to follow with some direction. Let me move over to this slide. Okay. And I asked them to write about themselves as a worker. And so I just put an outline here on the board. They were to write 1 paragraph about themselves as an employee. We talked and we came up with a topic sentence. 3 supporting sentences. For example, first, I prefer to work weekends. They had to fill in second and third, and of course if your students are higher level and can do more, of course you adapt it that way. And then they needed a concluding sentence. In conclusion, I think that I will be a good employee, or as some of them said, I think that I am an excellent employee. So this was one of my follow-up expansion activities. And then I found out almost immediately that the lower level students were not able to do that. So I came over to the other side of the board, and as I put in the pink box here, for lower level students, you may need to write a paragraph on the board from what they tell you and have them copy it and help them fill in supporting sentences. Wow, this was really hard for even my lower level students, which are about beginning high to intermediate low. We talked about indenting. We talked about commas, capitals, periods, everything. And so they copied this, and those that were able to filled in their sentences. Those that weren't able to, we did it together as a class. All right, and that is, what kind of worker are you? Now I'm looking at our time, and we're going to have to move along. If you have a question, feel free at this time, or you want to make a comment down here in the general chat. Feel free to write something. And if not, I'll move on to lesson 2. Okay, let me open lesson 2. All right, now let me go over here. All right, I think I better make that larger again so you can see. All right, lesson 2. Choose the best applicant. Oh, they really like this one. This one, for once they get to consider employees, 3 applicants, 3 candidates, and decide which one of them is best for a desk clerk job that they are offering. So here's the overview here, and here are the skills to work in teams, to negotiate, evaluate data, and communicate. And then down below, these are a couple of the activities students will be doing. Tell your group about your applicant, listen to learn about the other 2 applicants, and complete the chart with your group. And then on the right, work with your group. Who do you think is the best candidate for the job, and explain why. Okay, now again, be thinking about your classroom, what might work, what might not work as well. And let me go over here to lesson 2. Okay, all right, so in this lesson, students read descriptions of 3 job applicants and decide which skills each applicant has and who is the best candidate for the position. All right, and I added in this box here to help students have a better understanding of the context of this lesson. Consider introducing your class to http://www.indeed.com to see a sample job description with required skills listed. So let me go over here to slide 25, and I better make this larger so you can see. This is a website that is recommended in the expansion activities of this lesson, and I thought it was interesting because our lesson is for a job opening for a front desk clerk, and this is an actual opening for a job, and it tells about the requirements. Hospitality, customer service experience required. We're looking for a strong, creative problem solver who enjoys being a social butterfly. So that's great for conversation. Responsibilities include, and they list the responsibilities. There's a job description. And this is in Cyprus where my class is. And so they were very interested in that. And it raises their desire to learn about what employers are looking for in an employee. So that's something that they really enjoyed, and I recommend opening that way. It kind of helps them to see what we're talking about. All right, and we saw what a hotel is looking for in an employee. All right, and let's move on to the next. All right, and coming down on this lesson, moving down, workplace skills, work in teams, as we said, negotiate, acquire and evaluate data, interpret, communicate, use critical thinking and problem-solving skills. So this is where you're going to want to think about your grouping and putting a higher level student with lower level students. And you'll see below here the technique. Oh, well, excuse me. So I listed those on the board to raise student awareness about the workforce skill vocabulary. And I don't want to overlook this, but I always ask them for synonyms or definitions for each one, and to be sure that they are writing it down so that they're getting writing experience, vocabulary, spelling. All right, and this lesson calls for jigsaw reading and collaboration. So they have students form groups of 3. And let's see, could I ask you to raise your hand, participants, if you've used jigsaw reading before? Carol, okay. Karen, Jennifer, okay. And it can be a challenge in a multi-level classroom, can't it? Okay, Flavia, very good. All right. Okay, let me go down here then. And the materials. We're going to go back to the useful phrases sheet, but this time we're going to use asking for repetition and clarification and showing understanding. So we review these with the class and give samples and examples of how they are used. Encourage students to write themselves notes to help them remember later what the meaning of these phrases are. And as we go down to the lesson, I'll show you those. Okay? I think it's a little hard to go, may get you dizzy going down the page too quickly. But let's continue down this lesson. Tell students that they're going to do a small group activity. Before beginning the activity, have students brainstorm. Well, in this section here, I made an adaptation down below here. It says warm-up corners activity option, and this really helps me in the multi-level class. So as a warm-up, I ask students to walk to one of 3 labeled corners in the room that names their best English skill. So I put reading in one corner, writing in another, and speaking in another. And on the board I wrote, why do you think that this is your best skill and when do you use it most? So everybody stands up, they walk to the corner for their best English skill, and then they discuss for just a few minutes. Why do you think this is your best skill? Well, in my country we learned to read and write, but we didn't really practice speaking, or etc. Then to make the 3 groups of 3 for this project, if you look down below, multi-level small groupings, I formed groups of 3 by taking 1 student from each corner, considering mixing levels so that at least 1 student in each group is higher than the others. This way each group has 1 person most comfortable in reading, 1 who can help write, and the other who can communicate. And boy, this works out great. If you have low-level students, have the higher-level student read about the candidates aloud to the group. So if it just isn't working to have everybody read, you can have 1 volunteer in each group, and they can explain or ask about words along the way. If it seems very difficult for your class, I recommend that you just read it as a class. Read it to them and discuss the skills as a class, and write each candidate's name and skill on the board. Okay? And students have a copy. So let me show you what it is they're reading. Groups work together to complete a skills chart. All right? Yeah, you're right. They may not have a balance of abilities. So we're trying to do that through the 3 corners activity. Students with the most confidence in writing can help the group with this part of the lesson on the skills chart, and the other students can copy or go along with them. They have to contribute, but they may get help from their strong writer in the group. After the groups complete the chart, ask them to decide who they think will be the best candidate and why. They must defend their answers. And so we asked the group, and they said, we think Evan Moreno is the best candidate because he gets along well with the customers and his co-workers. And encourage other students to respond by using the phrases from the useful phrases sheet, such as I agree, I don't agree, I disagree. And then just for fun, we put on the board the 3 candidates' names, and the students came up from each group and checked the one that they had decided was the best. It was very interesting. All right, here is their reading sheet for the jigsaw reading. 3 applicants, Annabelle, Evan, Joy. They read about those, and then together they fill out the skills chart. What are their personal characteristics, technical skills? And then after that, they work together and they decide who is the best candidate. And that information we put into a information chart on the board. And it was very interesting. Almost the vote was divided three ways evenly. And they all had their own ideas about why, but they did love to be empowered to make that decision. And then here also again, they're going to use, this useful phrases, asking for repetition and clarification. I didn't catch that, I didn't hear you, I missed that, and etc. And going down to showing understanding. Now I've got it. I understand, I'm with you, and such. And that is choose the best applicant. All right. 2 lessons and a few minutes to go to number 3 and have you participants decide how you would adapt a lesson for your multi-level classroom. All right, so let me go over to lesson 3. And I'm going to show the overview of it up here. Okay, lesson 3. This is your lesson now. And I'm going to ask you to type in the general chat ways that you would adapt this lesson. And this lesson is called Skills to Help You Succeed. On the left, we have self-assessment. These are the skills: school and work, interviewing skills, speaking and listening skills. Okay? And you'll see here there's the lesson and then 2 sheets they're going to get. Skills to help you succeed at work, skills to help you succeed in class. So everyone's going to get a copy of those. And let's go down to lesson 3. All right. Now let me go to this slide here on the top left. Adding suggestions for use in the multi-level ESL classroom. Thinking about scaffolding and grouping. Interview pairs are incorporated into this lesson. Okay, for the introduction please look at this lesson and go down to the general chat and make a suggestion that you might use to help your multi-level class prepare to do this lesson. And let me see if I can raise it up a little bit so you can see. Students take an inventory of the skills they have that will help them succeed in the classroom and at work. After doing a personal self-inventory in each area, they share with a partner. They learn to make explicit statements about their own skills, which once practiced in the classroom can be transferred to the workplace. This activity helps students understand what employers are expecting from their employees. And take a look. Here are the skills that we mentioned. Technique, guided pair interview followed by whole class report. Good. And Catherine's making a very good explanation here. She's saying go ahead and participants can scroll through this lesson, take a look at it, and take a few minutes to think about adaptations you would make for the multi-level classroom. One thing I thought about with this lesson, where it says under technique, in pairs, students practice making explicit statements about their own skills. This lesson recommends I introduce myself and I talk to my coworkers in English. How about you? So I was thinking maybe as a class, especially either in tutoring pairs or with the lower levels, maybe to look at the questions on the inventory and maybe write on the board how to change them into questions. Do you introduce yourself and talk to your coworkers in English? Good. And Jennifer is saying one might want to demonstrate and or role play workplace skills before the self-inventory. That's a great idea. And Daniel's asking, is this on a PDF or on a PowerPoint here? Do you mean the lesson, Daniel, or Flavia? Before giving them handouts, brainstorm with the class a list of skills and write them on the board. Exactly. The lesson on the right. This is not on the PowerPoint. There is a PDF, and also you can get it, I believe, in a Word document from the website. And Catherine's going to take you there after we finish with this lesson, okay? All right, and Nancy is saying, I think she means students give examples of other people's skills, maybe a short story about someone at work. Maybe they could offer their own experience at work. Okay, the PDF is here. Okay. We emailed this to everyone, but you can also download this from the virtual workroom. So you may have it in your email. Can you show the Word documents on here, or do they have to be PDFs? I'm not sure about that. Daniel, sorry. Discuss and share job skills required for my own job. Ask for student input. Great. All right. What do you think about the changing the statements on the inventory to questions? Let's go down here, because I know if we just hand this out to our students and say ask, for example, here on the class inventory, they check for themselves. I come to class on time. True. I know many of them will not know how to ask their partner, do you come to class on time? So I know I would have to go through here and have students work with me or work in small groups or with a partner to turn these into questions. I also did an expansion on this one with my class where they added more suggestions at the bottom, things that were not listed here. And Marina is suggesting to make it personal first, give your information as an example, and then ask students to change the sentence on the inventory into questions and interview each other. Great. I think that would work too. And Cindy said, whoops, where'd she go? There she is. Discuss and share job skills required for my own job. Yep, I think I did say that before. Good. Add some adverbs to the questions. Do you usually come to class on time? That's funny. I was thinking many of my students would say most of the time or sometimes, not always. Good. All right. Now, do you think you would do these in pairs, or would you have your students work in small groups? That's another question. Lillian said add adverbs. Okay. And Karen says brainstorm questions they could ask and write on the board for the activity. Okay. And Pamela said she would use pairs. Would anybody use groups for any reason? It might depend on how many higher level students you have. Karen, would you, the groups would give greater variability in the answer? I think that's true too. How would you have these pairs or groups report back to the whole class? Would you use both surveys or would you use one? In my class, I was able to use one on one day and the other the next, just because of time. I would use both, put on separate nights. Good. Okay. Pamela, I would use both. Okay. Anyone else? Good. Other people are typing. And we'll be finishing up here in just a couple minutes, and we'll go over to Catherine. Okay, Karen said she would use both. Marina, depends on how long the class is and the number of students. Yes, of course. I agree. Lillian says it would be useful to organize student responses in terms of percentage for each question. Use a graphic to show the result. Most definitely. And I think you could get students laughing pretty good too, especially number 4, I do my homework and bring it to class. Wow. Oh, there might be a little infighting about that. Or they could use their I disagree phrases. Okay, we'll take a couple more responses. And I think one last thing I want to make a point of pointing out to you here is on page 4, student pair practice. Imagine you are on a job interview. Make the statements above that are true for you. Then ask your partner, what about you? Or how about you? Because the point is when they go for a job interview, they need to be able to describe themselves as a worker and what their skills are, what their abilities are, etc. And this lesson gives them a chance to prepare and practice English that they can use at that job interview. Okay. And Flavia is saying she would use both inventories, but use different students in groups of 2 or 3. And I think that's a good reminder, Flavia, that it is important to sometimes switch up those groups so that the same students aren't working together all the time. They become a little bit comfortable, I think. And then Jennifer, our final comment, it might be nice to alter the surveys to allow more choices. True, usually, rarely. So there you go. You know your classes, you know your levels, you know your students, and the beauty here is that you've all given a lot of ideas about how to make this these lessons more comprehensible and more meaningful for your students. So in conclusion, I'm just going to scoot along here, our time is flying by. I would ask you these. Is there anything from the webinar that you think might help you to reach more student needs in your multi-level classroom? We're going to have to kind of scurry through these. I hope so. Is there a strategy or idea for teaching that might increase your joy for teaching in the multi-level ESL classroom? If so, please briefly type it down below. Joy in the classroom is so incredibly powerful, I think. And finally, how might you incorporate these CalPro workforce lessons in your curriculum? Good. Good. Nancy is saying that these lessons fit beautifully in the jobs unit. Great. And Jennifer is saying she appreciates the suggestion to ask comprehension questions about the steps and guidelines for an activity. Wow, we find out quickly that we've skipped that step if we don't we? Sudden mass confusion on the floor. Lillian says she feels refreshed with the expansion and application of workforce skills. I can't wait to implement it in the classroom. Wonderful. Great. Good material, interesting activities that we can use in groups. Okay, thank you. Okay. Great. Thank you, everyone. It was nice to meet with you today online. Yay to ambiance, Daniel, huh? Okay.
Jennifer, this is Catherine. If I may, can I just share with them quickly where to look on the CalPro website and also suggestions?
Yes.
So if you're still typing, please just hang on to your keyboard for a moment. The layout's going to change. You should still be able to type.
Okay.
So I just wanted to thank Jennifer for doing a tremendous job, and before you leave, quickly point out where exactly you could find these and other lessons. So let me just take a moment to share my screen. Just one second. So I have now logged into the virtual workroom that she was mentioning, and this is sort of an opening page. And if this is too small for you to see, there is a little full screen button that's in the upper right of the blue screen that I'm sharing. So when I click on the ESL instruction tab, I get the whole list of 11 materials which were produced by Rana Meiji, who's in our audience today, and Donna Price. It's a wonderful set of materials. And when you go to the website, you'll see you can click on a summary, and it drops down to tell you what it's about. And then you click on the actual set of materials to download the Word documents, and then you can use them or adapt them for use with your students. Please remember that the multi-level adaptations she showed today were just demonstrations for you, and you have copies of those in the email we sent you with the access instructions for this. So that's basically where you'll find that. Let me just point out one other piece of information here. I'd like to encourage everybody who's interested in this topic not only to visit the virtual workroom, but to consider joining our electronic community of practice. And I'll send you more information about that tomorrow after this webinar. But I'd also like to point out that we have a fantastic class, actually two fantastic classes that would relate to this audience. One is Integrated and Contextualized Workforce Skills in the ESL Classroom. It begins actually on Friday, and so if you wanted to register for it, there's the link. And we also have a class that just started on Monday, which you could jump in and catch up on easily, called Managing the Multi-Level ESL Class. It's not specifically tied into workforce skills, but it is about multi-level ESL instruction. And then two others you might be interested in that are also appropriate to ESL instructors. One is Understanding the Adult Learner, looking at adult learning and development, and also Designing Programs for Adults with Learning Disabilities. It really looks at effective instructional strategies and using, for example, Universal Design for Learning, UDL, which is great for students with LD and also students who are English language learners. So those are 4 classes we have coming up that either have just started or most of them are starting Friday. I'd like to encourage you to consider taking one or more of those if it seems appropriate. And by all means, please consider joining the electronic community of practice. We will have a copy of this webinar available in our archive probably Friday or Monday. Here is the link to the electronic community of practice that sponsored today's webinar. And there you can find discussion forums to continue the conversation with people who joined this webinar, as well as others. There's a wealth of additional resources there. They're all human resources who are sharing lesson plans and other things. So that's all I'd like to point out. If anybody has any additional questions for CalPro about anything I've said or any follow-up to this, by all means, please email me and I'll be sure to get back to you. Again, a great round of applause to Jennifer for leading us through this webinar today. It was a great session. I really enjoyed learning a lot myself. So if you have no questions, you're welcome to close the window and leave the webinar. If you do have questions, I'll stay on for another couple minutes and watch the chat pod. Again, thanks everybody, and thanks mostly to Jennifer.
Yes, thank you. Have a great day.